There are nights in history that generations agree never happened. Nights swallowed by silence, passed down only through shivers, warnings, and the uneasy way elders glance at one another when the date approaches again. In central Alabama's cotton country, there is one such night, May 23, 1852. An hour of darkness so profound that even those born a century later refused to speak its name. By dawn, 17 bodies lay cold on the grounds of the Yancey plantation. The magistrate's report, sealed for 73 years, held details so horrifying that when it was finally unsealed, the 3 historians who read it begged the courts to hide it again. The terror of that night did not begin with the Bodies, nor with the violence that tore the plantation apart. It began with something quieter, subtler, and infinitely more dangerous. 2 identical sisters, raised to believe they owned everything around them, including the man they both came to desire. The Yancey plantation spread across 2,000 acres of soft, fertile soil on the banks of the Alabama River, its mansion rising proudly above the fields like a monument to inherited power. The columned structure, draped in imported French windows and wrapped in a deep veranda, represented everything the antebellum South glorified: wealth, not earned but extracted, elegance built on the backs of the 143 enslaved men, women, and children who lived and died on that land since 1798. The Yancey name had been tied to cotton and cruelty, passed from father to son in an unbroken chain until cholera took Cornelius Yancey in 1848. He left behind no sons, only his twin daughters, Carolyn and Catherine, born 23 minutes apart, identical in face and form, though utterly unlike in spirit. Their mother had died in childbirth, leaving Cornelius to mold his daughters with the same stern dedication he applied to his plantation. The twins were striking young women, tall and graceful, their auburn hair braided in intricate patterns that caught the sunlight, their green eyes unusually bright against their pale skin. Observers often spoke of their beauty and their eerie likeness, but those who spent time near them understood quickly that the resemblance ended at the surface. Caroline inherited her father's sharp intellect and colder instincts. She managed the books with precision, negotiated cotton sales with malefactors who grudgingly admired her skill, and maintained a spotless reputation among Montgomery society. Every ledger she touched was immaculate. Every Sunday, she sat in the Methodist church in Cahaba, with perfect posture and the stillness of a woman who believed in order above all things. Catherine, on the other hand, inherited none of that discipline. She possessed a restlessness that no tutor could suppress. She read French novels considered scandalous by respectable society, rode through the countryside alone, vanished for hours into the gardens, and returned with the distant look of someone searching for something she could not name. She was unpredictable, questioning, rebellious, not cruel, like some plantation daughters, but dangerous in the way people become when their minds refuse to bow to the world around them. For 4 years after their father's death, the 2 sisters maintained a delicate balance. Caroline ran the business. Catherine tended to the household. The plantation thrived, but in March of 1852, the balance shifted. Caroline had gone to Montgomery, intending only to purchase supplies and perhaps a new mule. Instead, she found herself standing before the slave auction block, her eyes drawn to a tall, dark-skinned man with a restrained posture and a gaze that showed intelligence even as humiliation threatened to crush it. His name was Samuel. He was 27, literate, strong, and far too composed for a man being sold like livestock. Caroline noticed his literacy first. Literate enslaved workers were rare, expensive, and valuable for a plantation as large as hers. She bought him for $1,200, a sum that caused murmurs among the bidders. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that Catherine had seen him, too had watched him, with a fascination she did not understand. had felt something unfamiliar tighten in her chest when she saw the defiance in his eyes. Samuel came to the Yanzi plantation on March 18th. Carolyn assigned him to the house, much to the irritation of Virgil Henley, the overseer whose cruelty was as predictable as the seasons. Henley distrusted educated enslaved people, but Caroline insisted Samuel would not go to the fields. He would assist her with letters, ledgers, and inventories. And for 2 weeks he did. Catherine watched him. She watched his quiet dignity, the careful way he moved, the intelligence in his gaze. She watched the tension in his jaw when Henley barked orders. She began engineering reasons to be near him, books that needed moving, chairs that needed adjusting, trivial tasks that brought her into the same room as the man her society insisted was nothing more than property. The first true conversation happened on April 2nd in the library. Samuel was cataloging books when Catherine entered, closing the door behind her. In a world where even accidental privacy between a white woman and an enslaved man could mean death, the gesture was shocking, dangerous, irreversible. "Can you read these?" she asked, touching the spines of the books he was sorting. "Or do you only copy the titles?" Samuel hesitated. Telling the wrong truth could cost him his life. But Catherine's curiosity felt genuine, not mocking. "I can read them, miss," he said quietly. "My first owner's wife taught me. She was a Quaker." Catherine took a book from the shelf. Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, asked him to describe it. He did. She listened, enraptured. Her skirts fanned around her like petals. She returned the next day, and the next. Soon their conversations deepened, moving from novels to music. From distant cities, Samuel had heard about 2 ideas Catherine had never been allowed to explore. In those stolen hours, she discovered a world beyond the limitations of her birth, and Samuel tasted something as intoxicating as freedom, dignity. By late April, their meetings had become something intimate, emotional, and forbidden. Catherine's feelings grew reckless, consuming. Samuel's grew fearful, conflicted, undeniably tender. And Caroline noticed. She noticed the brightness in Catherine's eyes whenever Samuel was near. She noticed Samuel's flushed face the day he was missing from his duties for half an hour, returning with straw in his hair, straw from the stable loft. That night, she found the blanket, the book, the imprint of bodies in the hay. She understood immediately. Her sister had done the unthinkable, and worse, Caroline recognized the dangerous stirring within herself. The attraction she had buried under propriety, now forced into the open. The next weeks twisted into something poisonous. Caroline began calling Samuel to the office late at night. She softened her voice. She touched his hand. She used her authority to keep him near. Samuel found himself trapped between the desires of 2 sisters who owned him. He tried to withdraw, but every path was blocked by the reality of his bondage. And Catherine, seeing Caroline's attention shift toward Samuel, grew desperate, reckless, possessive. Tension thickened across the plantation like the air before a storm. Then came the confrontation, and the pistol. And the ultimatum. And the night that would destroy them all. Caroline summoned Samuel to the office late one night, after the household had gone still. She locked the door behind him, a soft but unmistakable click that turned the room into a trap. The lamplight wavered across her face, revealing a tightness around her mouth he had never seen before. "You were with Catherine in the stable," she said. "Do not deny it. I have proof." Samuel felt the room shrink around him. His heart thudded in slow, heavy beats as he waited for her to continue, not daring to speak, not daring to breathe. "I could have you whipped," she said, her voice controlled, almost gentle. "I could sell you to the sugar plantations, where you would not live 2 years. I could hand you to the sheriff and watch you hang. You know I could." He did know. "But," she continued, taking a step toward him, "I am offering something else. What she proposed was not love, not forgiveness, not compassion. It was an arrangement, an exchange that revealed the corruption inside her heart, inside the entire system that had raised her. She would protect him from punishment. She would keep Catherine quiet. She would improve his conditions. She would perhaps someday consider freedom. In return, he would give himself to her in the same way Catherine believed he belonged to her, the same way the law said he belonged to both of them. He agreed because he had no choice. After that night, nothing in the house felt real anymore. Catherine sought him out with raw longing. Carolyn pulled him into private encounters, masked his work. Samuel drifted between them like a man drowning, unable to swim to either shore because the waters belonged to them, not him. By early May, people across the estate had noticed old Dina, who had lived through too many tragedies to be fooled, warned him plainly. White women and colored men never ends in anything but death. But Samuel could see no path that wouldn't kill him anyway. Catherine eventually discovered the truth, that Caroline was also meeting him, also claiming him, also using the threat of ownership as leverage. The realization did not destroy her affection, it poisoned it. Her jealousy ignited into fury. On May 15th, she confronted Samuel in the garden house, tears bright in her eyes. "She touched you," she whispered. "I can see it. She's taking you from me." "Miss Catherine," he said carefully, "I risk death for every moment I spend near either of you." "I don't care," she said. "I love you." He looked at her trembling hands, at her desperate face, and wondered what love meant to someone who had never been denied anything in her life. That same night, Catherine went to Caroline's room. The walls witnessed what the world would not hear for another 73 years. "You don't want him," Catherine shouted. "You just can't stand that I have something you don't." Caroline's reply was glacial. "I am protecting you from your own stupidity. You're lying. You want him." "Fine," Caroline snapped. "Yes, I want him. I have him. And unlike you, I understand exactly what he is property. That's not what he is to me." "Then you are a fool. He is ours. He will always be ours." Catherine's calm finally broke. "Then let him choose." "He cannot choose," Caroline said. "Slaves do not choose. That is the harsh truth you refuse to accept." "Then I will free him," Catherine cried. "Tomorrow. I'll draw up the papers." "You cannot," Caroline said. "I own half. I refuse." "Try it, and I will have him sold, so far south his bones will bleach in cane fields." Catherine's scream echoed down the hallway. By morning, the world had shifted. Samuel disappeared for several hours, hiding in the old cotton gin. When Henley dragged him back, the life seemed drained out of him. In the office, he stood before Caroline and finally broke. "You cannot force someone to choose between people who own him," he said. "This is not love. This is survival." Caroline felt the truth strike her like a blow. For a moment, she softened. She almost apologized. She almost freed him. Then Catherine stepped into the doorway, her eyes wide with hope, and Samuel, cornered, desperate, said softly, "If I must choose, I choose Miss Catherine." The silence that followed might have lasted an eternity. Caroline's smile was a cold, thin wound. "Your choice means nothing." Catherine's hope shattered, and Samuel understood he had triggered the final act of the tragedy. That afternoon, Catherine proposed something outrageous, dividing the plantation so she could take Samuel, free him, and marry him. Caroline rejected it instantly. The twins' argument escalated until Catherine reached for the pistol, hidden in her pocket. Caroline saw the movement. Her face drained of color. For several stretched seconds, the house seemed to hold its breath. Samuel intervened, stepping between them. "Miss Catherine, please." She released the weapon, but not the fury. She fled, and Caroline made her decision. Samuel would be sold within the week. Word spread through the enslaved quarters like wildfire. The fragile order that kept the plantation running trembled. By midnight on May 22nd, Catherine had made one last plan. She wrote a letter and arranged for Samuel to meet her in the garden house. She intended to run with him. She intended to leave everything behind. But Rose, terrified for her own family, went to Henley and told him everything. Henley gathered 6 armed men. Samuel walked to the garden house, unaware of the ambush forming around him. He stepped inside, saw Catherine's hopeful face, and for one single breath, the world was quiet. Then the door burst open. Torches flooded the room with light. Samuel raised his hands. Catherine stepped between him and the guns, and outside, Caroline, drawn by something deeper than instinct, walked into the night toward the moment that would destroy everyone. Henley filled the doorway like a verdict. The pistol in his hand glinted in the lamplight, his shadow stretching long and crooked across the floorboards. Behind him, 6 men crowded in with rifles and torches, the night at their backs glowing orange. "Step away from her," Henley said. Now, Samuel's heart pounded, but his face stayed still. Slowly, he lifted his hands and moved back, placing distance between himself and Catherine. Catherine did the opposite. She moved forward. "No," she said. "You will not take him. I sent for him. I brought him here. This is my doing, not his." "Miss Catherine," Henley replied, voice lined with false patience, "you need to go back to the house. You're shaken. You're not thinking clearly." "I am thinking perfectly clearly," she snapped. Henley's gaze hardened. "What happened here is simple. The slave tried to assault you. We stopped him. That's what we saw. That's what we'll say. That's what will be believed." Catherine stared at him, understanding, dropping over her like a stone. They would kill Samuel and call it protection. They would turn her choices into his sin. "That's a lie," she said. "He didn't touch me. I asked him to come. You are confused," Henley cut in, the menace in his tone no longer hidden. "You're upset. You're not responsible for what you say tonight. But if you keep talking like that, you will be." He meant it. She could see it in his eyes. Catherine turned to the other men in the doorway. Overseers she recognized from neighboring plantations. "All of you, listen to me. I invited him here. If you punish him, you punish an innocent man. I care about him. Do you understand? I care about him." One of the men, a thick-set overseer with a scar on his cheek, let out a harsh laugh. "Miss, with respect, that's exactly why this needs dealing with. This situation is already an abomination in the eyes of the law and the Lord. What we saw is enough for a hanging. You don't want your name tied to that. Run," she whispered suddenly to Samuel. "Run now." Samuel didn't move. There was nowhere to run. Before Henley could answer, another voice cut through the tension like a blade. "What is happening here?" Caroline stood just outside the doorway in her nightrobe, hair loose over her shoulders, face pale in the torchlight. She took everything in at once. The guns, the men, Samuel standing with his hands raised. Catherine caught between defiance and despair. "Miss Caroline," Henley said quickly, a practiced tone slipping into place, "we caught your slave attempting to force himself on your sister. We were about to administer justice." "That's not true," Catherine said, turning to her twin. Every fracture, every wound between them, was suddenly irrelevant. "You know that's not true. Tell them, please." Caroline's gaze moved from Catherine to Samuel and back. Her mind ran through every possible outcome, every consequence. If she admitted the truth, admitted that she and her sister had both been involved with Samuel, the scandal would destroy them. The story would spread from plantation to plantation, into town and church and courthouse. Samuel would die. They might be ruined. Their entire world would be dragged into the light and examined for its rot. If she agreed with Henley, one man would die quickly, and the system would go on. Her safety would remain intact, the hierarchy unbroken. She felt Catherine's eyes on her, felt Samuel's, felt the pull of something like conscience, battling with something much colder, Tell them, Catherine whispered. In her later testimony, Caroline would insist she hesitated, that she tried to find some third path. But in that moment, with armed men watching and fear pressing against her ribs, she chose. Mr. Henley is correct, she said quietly. Samuel has become unstable. He must be removed from the property at once. I will authorize his sale to the territories. Catherine stared at her as if she were a stranger. No, you're overwrought, Caroline said, voice thin. Go back to the house. This is a matter of discipline and business. The words were a sentence. Discipline, Catherine repeated. No, business? The air in the garden house shifted, hardening into something deadly. What happened next would be told a dozen different ways, by a dozen different people. Some swore Catherine reached for her pistol again. Others claimed she hurled words instead of bullets. A few said she lunged at Caroline, hands outstretched, but all agreed on one point. Samuel stepped forward. Stop, he said, placing himself between them once more. Both of you. This isn't worth destroying yourselves over. I'm not worth that. You don't get to decide your worth, Catherine said, tears bright and furious. You don't get to sacrifice yourself for them. I don't have a choice, he replied softly. Then he turned to Caroline. And neither do you, I suppose. Henley, tired of words, raised his pistol. Take him to the tree at the gin house, he ordered his men. We'll deal with this now. Caroline flinched. Wait, she said sharply. Sell him. Don't. With respect, Miss Caroline, Henley cut in. This has gone too far. The slaves are watching. If nothing comes of this tonight, word spreads. They see weakness. We need to re-establish order. There must be an example. She had called him. She had confirmed his lie. She had handed him power over Samuel's fate. Now it was out of her hands, and she knew it. Catherine broke first. She threw her arms around Samuel and held him there in front of everyone. Her cheek pressed against his chest, tears soaking into his shirt. Then you'll have to kill me too, she said. If you hang him, you go through me. Two men moved to pull her away. She fought like a wild thing, kicking and thrashing, but they were stronger, and she was still a woman raised in parlor rooms, not battlefields. They dragged her back toward the house as she screamed his name, her voice tearing at the night. Caroline watched it all, feeling as though she were outside her own body, watching someone else stand there, useless and motionless. Do what you must, she said to Henley, each word tasting like iron, but make it quick. I don't want him to suffer. Henley nodded as if she'd given him a reasonable order. Samuel was taken out into the dark. The oak tree by the old gin house had seen this before. Ropes, boadies, justice, they called it. Terror, it really was. The branches stretched over the yard like arms accustomed to bearing weight. Nothing official recorded what was done there. No magistrate wrote it down. But those who lived on that land did not need ink to remember the sound of the rope, or the way the night held its breath as a man's life was cut short between midnight and 1. Samuel died in the big house. Catherine had been locked in her room, pacing like a caged animal. Grief and rage burned through the last of her fear. At some point, she threw the window open, climbed onto the sill, despite the height and the dark, and let herself drop. The ground rose up hard. Pain shot through her leg as something cracked in her ankle. She hissed, nearly blacking out, but forced herself up. Limping, half stumbling, she moved across the lawn toward the gin house, guided by some instinct that knew exactly where to go. The torches were gone by the time she arrived. The men had left. The night was quiet again. Samuel was still there, hanging the sound that tore out of her. When she saw him was not the sob of a gently bred southern lady. It was an animal sound, a sound dragged from a place so deep that even the watching stars seemed to flinch. She went to him, fingers fumbling at the rope, tears blurring her vision. She pulled a small blade from her pocket, the little knife she'd meant for travel. for cut rope and bread on the road to freedom and sawed at the hemp until it gave. His body dropped. She dropped with it, racked by sobs as she cradled his weight in her lap. His head against her shoulder, blood smeared her gown where she'd ripped her own hands, open climbing from the window and carving through the rope. Dirt streaked her face. "What have they done?" she whispered, rocking him. "What have we done?" The scream, the second one, carried across the fields. It woke the house. It woke the quarters. It woke Caroline. She ran barefoot from the mansion, her robe billowing, heart pounding, half afraid, half aware of what she would find. When she reached the gin yard, she saw her sister sitting in the dirt, clutching Samuel's body like a widow in battle. For a long moment, the twins just stared at each other. The resemblance between them, always striking now, seemed cruel. Their hair tumbled into disarray, their faces pale, their nightclothes stained, one holding the man they had destroyed, the other standing above them, hands empty. "What have we done?" Catherine said again, her voice smaller now. "Caroline, what have we done?" Caroline opened her mouth, but nothing came out. No apology, no justification, no plea. Only silence. The enslaved quarters had come alive. Doors opened. Figures emerged into the humid night, drawn toward the sound like moths to a flame. They walked carefully at first, uncertain. Then they saw the scene more clearly. Samuel's slack body, Catherine streaked with blood, Caroline standing rigid, Henley and his men hovering nearby with weapons in hand. Old Dina moved slowly toward the group, shoulders squared despite her age. She looked from Samuel's body to the white faces around him, then back at the people gathered in the shadows. "They killed him over jealousy," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "Two white women fighting over a colored man, and they killed him for it. That's what happened here." Henley swore under his breath and took a step toward her. "Get back to your cabins," he ordered. "All of you, now." No one moved. Isaac stepped forward instead, his eyes fixed on Henley. Beside the gin house door leaned a shovel, forgotten in the rush of the night. Isaac's hand closed around its worn handle. He didn't raise it, he simply held it. "Put that down," Henley barked. Isaac didn't. Another field hand, Silas, picked up a length of wood. Someone else grabbed a rusted hoe. Weapons began to appear in the enslaved people's hands, not raised yet, but present, possible. Caroline felt panic surge hot in her chest. "Put those down," she said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "All of you, please. We don't need more blood." "Peacefully?" Isaac asked, his voice flat and cold. "Like how you peacefully killed Samuel." The night tightened. Later, no one would agree on who moved first. Some would say Isaac swung the shovel. Others that one of Henley's men, nervous and unsteady, fired his rifle too early. But suddenly, the air was ripped by a gunshot. Then another, then a scream, then another scream, and then there were no more words. The world at the gin house exploded into chaos. Enslaved workers lunged forward, driven by fury and hopelessness. Henley's men fired into the crowd, their torches throwing wild, jerking shadows over swinging tools and flailing limbs. People fell. Some stayed down. Others staggered and kept swinging. The violence spread in a wave. Men from the quarters joined, some out of rage, some out of terror, some because in that single, fragile moment, the wall of fear that had hemmed them in their whole lives had cracked just enough for them to imagine impossible things. Freedom, revenge, or simply a death that belonged to them instead of someone else. Caroline tried to step between them, shouting for order, for calm, for God, for anything. A stray blow struck her shoulder, spinning her sideways. She stumbled, gasping, then was shoved by bodies running past her. A shot went off close by. She felt something sear along her ribs, then warmth spreading under her hand. Catherine had not moved from Samuel's side, until the gunfire reached her. Then she lifted her head and saw Henley standing a short distance away, pistol raised, firing into a crowd of people who had never had the luxury of choosing violence before that night. Something in her snapped completely. With slow, deliberate motion, she took the pistol from her pocket, the same gun she had once nearly used on her sister, and rose to her feet, pain screaming up her broken leg. She braced herself against Samuel's body, aimed at Henley's men, and fired. The first man dropped with a surprised grunt, his torch rolling into the dry grass. The second man turned, stunned, and she shot him too. For a moment there was pure, unreal stillness, as everyone turned to see where the shots had come from. Then someone shot back. Catherine jerked as the bullet hit her chest. She crumpled backward, falling beside Samuel, blood spreading darkly across her gown. Her hand stretched blindly until her fingers brushed his. Caroline saw her sister fall. She stumbled toward her, one hand pressed to her side, the other reaching out. She never reached her. A second shot caught her low, knocking the breath from her lungs. She dropped to her knees, then to her side, facing Catherine across Samuel's body. Their eyes met. They had shared a womb, a cradle, a childhood. They had shared a man. Now, they shared the same dirt, the same blood, the same ending. "I'm sorry," Caroline whispered, though she couldn't be sure the words made it past her lips. Catherine's lips moved, forming something like a question, or perhaps a name, maybe Samuel's, maybe Caroline's. Then her eyes went still. By the time the fighting died down, bodies lay scattered around the gin yard and the nearby cabins. Henley was dead. 4 of his men were dead. 9 enslaved workers lay motionless. Some had died fighting. Some had been shot running. Some had simply been too close when fear ignited into bullets. Fire, once unleashed, rarely asks what started it. One of the dropped torches, rolling in the scuffle, had caught dry cotton or spilled lint. Glow turned to flame, flame to inferno. The gin house burned first, then embers leaped to another building, and another. The night filled with the sound of cracking timbers, screaming animals, and the low, frightened wails of children. The mansion burned too. By dawn on May 23rd, the Yanzi plantation was a blackened ruin. Smoke curled lazily into the already warming air. The oak by the gin house still stood, its bark scorched, its branches empty. 17 people lay dead. The official story came later, carried by frightened men to neighboring plantations, then to the county seat in Cahaba, then to the magistrate. In the version written into law, there was no jealousy, no love, no sisters bargaining with a man's life as though it were cotton. There was only a slave who assaulted a white woman, a brave overseer who intervened, and a violent slave rebellion that followed. Caroline and Catherine, in the record, died innocent and pure, tragic victims of black savagery. Samuel became a nameless aggressor, an example, a warning. The report was sealed, not because of concern for truth, but to contain the terror. Fear that stories like this might spread, fear that other plantations might see themselves reflected too. Clearly in what had happened at Yanzi, the enslaved survivors were sold off. One by one, families torn apart to satisfy debts and distance the county from the scene of disgrace. Children who had watched the flames from behind their mothers' skirts were scattered across the deep South. Their descendants would grow up with vague whispers about some terrible night in Alabama, something involving a tree and a fire and 2 white women who died screaming. The land changed hands. A new house rose, eventually, neat and proper, its fresh white paint hiding the scorched earth beneath. New enslaved people were brought there, with no knowledge of Samuel, of Catherine's pistol, of Caroline's silence. But land remembers what people try to forget. The oak tree outlived everyone who had hung a rope from its limbs. It stood there through war and ruin and reconstruction, a dark shape against changing skies. In 1912, A storm finally split it, lightning cleaving the trunk. The tree fell, and people said it was just age and weather, but some of the older black residents in the county walked out to see the fallen wood, touched it with their work-worn hands, and shook their heads without explaining why. In 1925, when the magistrate's sealed report was opened, the historians who read it did not ask to reseal it because it was untrue. They asked because it was too true, because it laid bare the rot at the heart of a society that could twist love into ownership, grief into violence, and murder into order. It told the story of two women who thought they could own a man's body and still claim his heart, of a man whose death became a mirror that showed everyone what they really were. Caroline and Catherine Yancey were buried side by side in the cemetery at Cahaba, under a shared stone that did not mention fire or rope or the 9 enslaved people whose graves were never marked. The inscription spoke only of beloved daughters taken too soon. Samuel's grave, if one existed, bore no name. Still, every year when May comes heavy and humid over the Alabama fields, there are families, black and white, both who pass down a story in pieces. They tell of a plantation that burned, of a man too educated for the chains he wore, of twin sisters who discovered too late that no amount of power, no legal deed, no bill of sale could make another person's heart a thing they could own. And somewhere beneath all the versions and all the silences, the truth of that night remains the same. 17 people died because a world built on ownership could not survive the moment one man insisted, however quietly, that he was more than property. The rest of the country would someday call slavery a sin, a horror, a crime. But for those who remembered May 23, 1852, the lesson was simpler and sharper. This is what happens when a system that feeds on human bodies collides with something it can't measure or love, dignity, choice. And this is what happens when people are taught from birth that they can own everything they touch, right up to the moment they discover that hearts, once given, refuse to obey.